Fraley. There's another name I know.
Hi there, John. How are you?
Yeah, pretty well, thanks.
Glad to hear it.
All right. Hello, everyone.
Good morning, Ahmad.
Good morning.
How are you this morning?
Great, great. So I'm in WSTS in San Diego. So
Ah,
all right, I think with no further ado, let's get started. So welcome everyone to call number 100. Today we have a fireside chat with John Eidson, Kang, and Doug Arnold to tell us about 1588 there at the beginning. So our moderator is Paul Borrill, and with no further ado, we'll basically pass it to Paul Borrill, and we'll take it from there. Paul, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Let me start my keynote presentation. I've got a bunch of slides that
up to a megawatt. So you're really talking about a high tower, high power environment. And there was someone yesterday made a comment about nanoseconds raining down from the sky.
I think
We're going to be able to blast them out from the sky.
So, can everyone please
Really
mute your microphone? Please mute your microphone so that we don't have any interruptions to the talk, please. Thank you. Good. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Let me get my keynote presentation started. And that will be the guide for what it is that I want to do now. There it is. All right. So I am going to. Good. We're here on time. Good. So thank you, Ahmed, for inviting me, and thank you everyone for coming and joining this special 100th session of the OCP Time Appliance Project. I'm honored to be your host today and to welcome our three special guests, John Eidson, Kang, and Doug Arnold. My name is Paul Borrill, and my background is in Silicon Valley companies, including Sun Microsystems, Quantum, Veritas Software, and Apple. And my obsession with dependable computing, which includes precision, started when I put an experiment on the last successful flight of the Space Shuttle Challenger. And I'm now on my third company, determined to realize a vision for simple, reliable, and secure microdata centers. And I'm also, which I think is the reason why Ahmed invited me to moderate this session, I'm the founder of the It's About Time Club, a place to discuss our evolving knowledge of the nature of time and causality for physicists, computer scientists, mathematicians, philosophers, and practicing engineers. It's in this latter role that I think gives me a unique insight to be able to ask questions of these folks who are the fathers of the IEEE 1588 protocol. So I'm excited about this fireside chat today because I was once the vice president for standards for the IEEE Computer Society. And I think I was the youngest person at that time on the IEEE Computer Society governing board. And for a couple of years, all of the IEEE Standards Committee were under my purview. What can I say? Sometimes people get promoted too soon. I was also the vice president of technical activities for a while, and I served on the IEEE Standards Board. So it's a pleasure to engage with this blast from the past on how great things can happen inside the IEEE. So I'm going to give a quick outline here of what we're going to do. I'm going to give you this is my 2-minute introduction, and I'm going to then introduce each of my guests separately, perhaps 1 minute each, just describing their institutions and credentials. And then we're going to have a 30-minute or approximately 10 minutes each from each of our speakers describing the past. Where did we come from? What happened? And then we'll have about 20 minutes to talk about the present, and I've left 10 minutes to talk about the future. So we have a free-flowing conversation here. I'd like to be able to save all of the questions from the audience until the end. I will make sure that we leave, 20 minutes or so or longer at the end for the audience to be able to ask their questions. But I'd like to have a free-flowing conversation from the three gentlemen who are the stars of the show today, and learn a lot more about the development and future of IEEE 1588, the Precision Time Protocol. So that's what to expect. I'm going to introduce John Eidson first, and then Kang Lee, and then Doug Arnold, just very briefly on who they are. And then after that, we will open up and have each of them give us about a 10-minute talk on where they say where IEEE 1588 Precision Time Protocol came from, what are the historical perspectives and insights, and how it became a reality to move industries forward. And all those gentlemen are luminaries of the IEEE, the industry and society, and driving innovation and efficiency across various domains. So John Eidson received his bachelor's and his master's degrees from Michigan State University in 1958, and in 1960, and in 64, his PhD from Stanford University. All of his degrees are in electrical engineering. After a 2-year postdoc at Stanford, John's career spanned 6 years at Varian Associates, 26 years at Hewlett-Packard, 10 more years at Agilent Technologies, and all of the respective companies' research laboratories. So after retiring in 2009, John spent the next 9 years as a visiting scholar at Professor Edward Lee's Ptolemy Group at UC Berkeley, which I know moderately well. John's research activities include analytic instrumentation, electron beam lithography, and instrument system architectures. And since 1987, his work centered on time-aware instrument and system architecture, clock synchronization protocols, and their applications. He is a Life Fellow of the IEEE, a recipient of the 2007 Technical Award from the IEEE Instrument and Measurement Society, and a co-recipient of the 2007 Agilent Laboratories Barney Oliver Award for Innovation, and the 2013 Time Lord. So here we go. We got a Time Lord on our audience, in our panel today. This is great. And from the International Telecommunications Synchronization Forum, John was chair of the 2002 and the 2008 IEEE 1588 working groups, and he was co-chair of the 2020 working group. So John, welcome. Thank you very much indeed. I'll introduce Kang and then Doug, and then we'll get back to you to open up this fireside chat in a true spirit of learning all about the wonderful things that you've done. So Kang Lee, who is on here today, Kang is retired from the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and after 40 years of federal government service as a group leader and program manager in various programs in smart and automated manufacturing research and development, including works with the US Department of Homeland Security on sensors, standards, harmonization, and the US Navy on advanced and automated manufacturing of highly accurate parts for submarine maintenance. Kang is currently a research advisor on the Wireless Systems for Industrial Automation Systems project in the Smart Connected Systems Division of the Communications Technology Laboratory at NIST. Excuse me. Kang is a Life Fellow of the IEEE and a chairman of the IEEE Instrumentation and Measurement Society's Technical Committee on Sensor Technology. Kang is a Life Fellow. This is the TC9 sponsoring the development of a family of 12 IEEE 1451 standards for smart sensors and actuators for IoT. The IEEE 1588 Precision Time Protocol, which we're going to talk about today, standards, and its series of amendments, of which there are many. The forthcoming IEEE 1588.1 standard for client-server precision clock synchronizations protocol, and the IEEE 3388 standard for performance assessment of industrial wireless systems. IEEE 3335 standard for time cards, something that is dear to our hearts, and a family of IEEE 3456 standards for testing instruments for deep foundations. That sounds really interesting, Kang. I want to learn more about that. So Kang is also the chair and the driving force of the organizing committee and the annual International IEEE Symposium on Precision Clock Synchronization for Measurement, Control, and Communications, or ISPCS. He started ISPCS in 2007 and continues managing it today by ensuring the symposium's quality and operational success. So welcome, Kang. Thank you very much. I will now introduce Doug Arnold, and then we will open up the floor for conversations at this fireside chat. So Doug Arnold is a principal technologist at Mindberg, USA. His duties include standards development, technical marketing, and pre-sale support. He's currently the chair of the IEEE 1588 Working Group, that's Precision Time Protocol, PTP. He's co-chair of the ISPCS PTP Plugfest Committee, Plugfest, and technical editor of the IEEE 1952 technical editor of IEEE P3335, co-author of the IETF Draft Enterprise Profile for PTP, and author of the 5-Minute Facts About Packet Timing blog, which is absolutely fascinating. Everyone should go and read that blog. He has over 20 years of experience designing and specifying precise timing technology. Doug holds a PhD in electrical engineering from the University of Illinois. So thank you very much, Doug. And I hope I'm just going to check in to make sure everyone can hear me correctly here. And then we will move on to John. Let's see where my screens are. There we are. Okay, we seem to have a nice attendance here today. I don't quite know how many total, but certainly we have a full house, which is good. I'm glad you could all join us. John, you're next. We're going to learn a lot more about you today, and perhaps this would be a good time to hand over to you and give us your introduction.
Thank you very much, Paul. What I'd like to do is to dredge up my senior memory and see if I can't, oh my God, look what's up there. See if I can't shed some light on how all this came about. So PTP is based on instrument system architecture work that several of us did in Hewlett-Packard Labs starting in the late 80s. And what we were interested in was to create instruments that could be programmed to execute at specific times as determined by synchronized clocks. And the motivation was things like, okay, you have a large test range with downhill things, and you want to have the downhill stuff make measurements when some appropriate thing arrived, which takes some time. So it's coordinating instruments over distributed systems and allowing them to, in the face of some event, to take action based on time as opposed to having to be triggered every time. This resulted in quite a bit of technical interest among the engineers at Hewlett-Packard, but it did not get any corporate buy-in at all. So in '99, HP split with the original instrument groups, becoming Agilent Technologies. My boss at Agilent found a compliant vice president of Agilent that agreed to let us turn our work into a standard to see if external customer requests would create corporate buy-in. It didn't, at least at the time, but it did have other ramifications. Now, fortunately, I've done some other standards work with Kang Lee, which Paul mentioned in his introduction to Kang. Kang was at NIST, was in NBS, and he agreed to sponsor the 1588 Working Group under the auspices of the Instrumentation and Measurement Society. I think that was critical. I've often been asked, why didn't you just go to 802? And the short answer is I knew Kang and he agreed. So that's how that mold was cast. There's some other things that were quite critical to bring in people, particularly in the early 2000 standards committee. In the late 90s, I received a call from a gentleman named Anatoly Moldavansky of Rockwell Automation. Somehow he'd heard of our work and asked to see it. And he came out and he took one look at it, says, "Can I use your phone?" He called his company, he says, "Stop the project, we're joining PTP." So as a result, Rockwell became the anchor automation company in the 2002 1588 working group. And I think that was really critical. They brought in the whole ODVA community, and they had applications that they wanted to use this for. I apparently was giving talks at PTTI about that time as well. I think probably as a result of an invitation from Len Cutler. And the significant thing about that is that the 2002 working group had a lot of people from the Naval Research Laboratory, Joe White being one of them, and Judah Levine from NIST. And they were instrumental in keeping some of us rather naive neophytes on track on that first committee. So a little bit of background about the commercial space. In the late 90s, most of the industrial automation companies, including Rockwell, were being pressured by their customers to provide Ethernet-based products that were conformant to a recognized non-company specific standard and with timing considerably better than the reigning standard NTP. And as luck would have it, 1588 was published at just the right time to meet these three requirements. The reception for PTP was generally positive, although it did clearly upset the plans for some of the companies. And with the publication of 2002, I spent a lot of time trying to raise the awareness. I became a salesman, basically. At one speech at a local I&M meeting in Santa Clara, I had a long-term result. There were maybe 10 people in the room, including the host and myself, a young lady who I supervised her master's degree at San Francisco State. But critically, there were 5 others, including Doug Arnold. And I believe that's how he got wrapped up into this thing. Other stops that I made was ITSF, WSTF, the ITUT, CERN, the ODVA, the LXI Consortium, and as I mentioned, PTTI. However, I think the most consequential event in creating this technical community that was a NIST workshop started by Kang and myself, held at NIST in Gaithersburg on September 24th, 2003. I'm sure those who were there remember that. The workshop consisted of a plug fest where vendors could work out system compatibility issues. Although at that first one, it was more of a science fair. There were technical papers and socialization. All of these things have become a hallmark of the PTP conferences and workshops. And that's one of the key things that helped work out technical and conformance issues and create a community involving companies, standards, and academics. The paper topics at that first workshop, there were some from industrial automation, from Rockwell, and from Siemens. Siemens was present there. From power systems, from General Electric drives and controls. That was Mark Shepard. This is the group at GE that made the huge power turbines for generating power for the electrical grid. Same technology as airplane engines. It's a very interesting application. Military flight test. It's a gentleman from L3 Communications. So these were pretty much sort of crusty industrial attendees. And to our great surprise, there was a paper from telecommunications by Glenn Alge of Nortel Networks. We all looked at each other and said, what is this? But that's how telecom joined the PTP community. Interestingly, if you look at the three editions and the working groups, the 2002 working group, as I mentioned, included representatives from Naval Research, NIST, Oak Ridge, Agilent, GE Medical, a couple small companies, critically Rockwell Automation. Publication, there were 13 active members and 25 in the ballot group. It's still fairly small and compact. The 2008 working group, on the other hand, consisted of 50 members from telecom, industrial automation, power, test, instrumentation, and others, including companies making PTP compliant products. For example, Hirschmann, Siemens, Rockwell, and Meinberg. I must give a shout out to Meinberg. Their participation has been absolutely critical to the support and vitality of the PTP conferences. 2 new members joined the working group. Doug Arnold, who became the co-chair for 2020 and is now the leader of the PTP work, and Jeff Garner, who I'm sure many of you know. He provided links to the 802 and the ITUT groups. In my opinion, Jeff is just a towering figure in the area of timing standards. I cannot think of very few people that have made the contributions as to the extent that Jeff has. The ballot group consisted of 55 members from all of the communities mentioned. Good grief. Look at that picture. That's my wife on my right-hand side, by the way. The 2020 group consisted of 26 members from all of the above areas, with a notable addition of Maciej Lipinski from CERN. I'd done a bit of work with CERN over the years, and I was glad to see Maciej join. And he provided a link to the White Rabbit work and to a larger scientific community around that. The ballot group was 118 people from every place you can imagine, which shows a huge uptake. The PTP community, as we know it, actually arrived in 2007 when the conference was turned into an official IEEE conference, a very long name, the International Symposium on Precision Clock Synchronization for Measurement, Control, and Communication. It was held at the Austrian Academy of Sciences building, which had frescoes on the ceilings of the auditorium and the meeting rooms. The conference dinner was held in the Gloriette at Schobert Palace outside Vienna. And while most of us, I'm sure, have forgotten the content of the technical papers, I assure you nobody has forgotten the camaraderie of that conference dinner and the other social events. Succeeding conferences have maintained this sense of community, which in my opinion has been invaluable in building the support for the technical work. Just a side personal comment, I was 63 when I started the 2002 working group, and I will always treasure the many years working with the members of the PTP community. And I continue to be astounded at the various applications of PTP and the advances in timing technology. While working with PTP community, my wife Roberta and I have made many friends worldwide who we treasure and have greatly enjoyed the travel and new experiences enabled by this community. And with that, I think we'll move on, Paul. Still there, Paul?
Yes, I'm still here. We had some noise outside. I had some gardeners, and so I muted myself so you wouldn't hear all the noise. But John, thank you. That was wonderful. I really appreciate it. So next on the list, I have Kang Lee, if you would like to go now. And I'm going to give you 10 minutes to introduce yourself and your relationship to the IEEE 1588 Precision Time Protocol. Kang, go ahead.
We have been over 25 years, as if I've known you all my life. By the way, can you hear me, right?
We can hear you just fine,
Okay,
yes.
good, good. Yeah, good. I would say a few words from my perspective. As Paul said, that I work for U.S. federal government organization, NIST, under Department of Commerce for over 40 years. I have worked with the NIST so long on standard, as indicated in the original name, the U.S. Bureau of Standards, and later in 1988, it transformed into a new name, the National Institute of Standard and Technology as of today. At the same time, I've been leading efforts in developing IEEE standard. By the way, in the IEEE slogan, IEEE's core purpose is to foster technological innovation and excellence for the benefit of humanity. So even after retirement, I still continue to contribute my expertise to the standardization area for the benefits of industry as well as humanity, both in NIST and IEEE for as long as possible. I don't know if you know that the IEEE standard development history, typical standard take 3 to 4 years to develop, or even longer, depending on the difficulty or complexity. That's why the IEEE standard project authorization request, we call PAR, P-A-R, suggests that one put down 3-year minimum to complete the development of a standard. Why did I say that? Because I'll say later that we did the first version of 1588 in 2 years. That was historical in a sense. So in April 1994, I organized a workshop at NIST entitled First Smart Sensor Interface Standard Workshop, because I'm working on industrial automation using sensors. If I can make sensor more smart, it will make the automation process more sophisticated. So the result of the workshop, many Hewlett-Packard folks joined, indicated there was a need for a smart sensor interface standard in order to facilitate interoperability in industry. So I started organizing the Instrumentation and Measurement Society's Technical Committee on Sensor Technology, called TC9, to initiate the development of smart sensor interface standard for sensors and actuators to support the manufacturing industry. Because in manufacturing control system, sensor input are used to drive actuator according to the specific manufacturing process. So by 1997 and 1999, Hewlett-Packard folks were the main driving force behind me to complete the development of the IEEE 1451.2 1997 standard for smart transducer interface for sensors and actuators, and the IEEE 1451.1-1999 standard for sensor network interface. Well, why do I even mention this? Because in the year 2000, when John mentioned that the HP folks had decided to take timing and synchronization from the smart sensor interface out and establish a time synchronization protocol by itself, at that time mainly for Ethernet network, that is 3 or 4 order of magnitude more precise than the NTP at that time, mainly aiming for test and measurement industry. Then John approached me to discuss the establishment of such a synchronization standard at IEEE. I was excited about that. And the standard destination was called IEEE 1588, which is maintained as of today. Even though John mentioned that, some folk in 802.11 had asked if I would be able to release the standard to be included in 802. I bluntly say no. No, in fact, the industry gave us the 1588 an acronym, Precision Time Protocol, or now popularly called PTP. I guess it's easier to recognize and shorter than the long title that we have for the standards. So as I mentioned before, that the first version of the standard took 2 years. The reason is because John and his staff were working very hard to develop the standard and present it to the working group. And then we all just check on it, and it looked very good. And then we accept it as the base standard for 1588. That's why it took 2 years, for completions. And then the second version took 8 years. The reason is because, as John mentioned, in all the workshops I organized, and also the ISPCS, conference, we introduced a lot this standard worldwide, so more industry interested. So when you have more industry people participate, it takes longer to establish. After that, the next version, after 2008, John asked me, Kang, how long would it take? I say, well, it shouldn't take that long, right? Because we already built the basis, but it took 11 years. We have the standard third version completed in 1999, and it was accepted as an ISO IEC 6 1588 standards. All this mainly because we have more and more exposure of this 1588 standard worldwide, and that's why more people are involved, and then more input to build the standard stronger and then better. Okay. As I mentioned that I organized the ISPCS mainly to not only have people present paper about 1588 implementation and new idea that can introduce in 1588 standard, but mainly to have the PerkFest, as mentioned by John, and Doug will give more detail later, that allow industry to bring the equipment in that implement 1588 to test with each other for interoperability. That is the key issue. That's why the PerkFest is very important. Matter of fact, in all the conferences, ISPCA is the first conference, as far as I know, that implement not only present advanced papers, but also do conduct this PerkFest for industry. That's why there's another way that the industry become more involved into the 1588 standards. As I mentioned before, that I organized workshop and conference at NIST, but people say, well, can we organize this conference under IEEE so that the paper will be published in IEEE journals and all? So I did that. I applied with IEEE, and they have the first ISPCS conference held in the Austria Academy of Science in Vienna, Austria in 2007. Actually, a couple years ago, we went back to Austria, Vienna, for the last conference. Well, after that, I say, well, where can we go? I always hit in the back of my mind, I want to publicize 1588 worldwide, so that I moved ISPCS to Beijing, China in 2015, excuse me. So it was a total success. And this coming October 7 to 11, ISPCS will be held in Tokyo, Japan. I invite all of you to join me in Tokyo, Japan. One last thought, why I keep working on 1588 for so long? John asked me when the 1588 2008 version was completed, and then it took another 11 years. They say, Kang, I cannot do it forever. I have to retire. That's fine. So as soon as 1588 2019 version is completed, he announced his retirement for 1588. And Doug took over, did a fabulous job also. As you can see, version, 1 take 2 years, version 2 takes 6 years, and then the last version take 11. So it looked like it multiplied more and more year. Okay, So we have been, I guess it's a total of 20 years working on the 1588 standard. And we're going strong with Doug as the current leader. Another incentive why is because once I met, you probably heard of Dr. Vin Cerf. He's known as the father of the internet. Met him at the NIST Directors Conference Room. We sit down and we have a chat about his effort on the internet standards. If you call father of the internet, you must be really good at that. And he said, yes, it took me 10 years before it become popular and accepted, TCP/IP standard, used worldwide in industry. He said to me, which I still remember today, if you believe in some standard, that is good, no matter how difficult. Just keep working on them with your vision. Someday will be recognized and will be well accepted. PDP is a very good example down in history, as he said. So actually, Vince personally gave me my IEEE fellow plaque in the meeting in Virginia. I really appreciate that. And he actually invited me to visit his home in Virginia, in which he installed some sensor for security monitoring. And he asked me, someday maybe you can help me to implement your smart sensor 1588 standard, protocol in his home. So I'm looking forward to it someday. That's my history with 1588. I hope that it sheds some light into the whole process, that so you get some idea that if you believe in a standard that's good, keep doing it until it becomes accepted. Okay. Thank you, Paul.
You're very welcome, Kang, and thank you very much. That sounds like the famous Winston Churchill quote, which is never, 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 ever quit.
Yes, yes.
So I'm very much familiar with the IEEE standards and how you have to have a great deal of determination and tenacity in order to be able to make things happen in the IEEE. When I was Vice President of Standards for the IEEE Computer Society a long time ago, that was the most common criticism that I received from everyone who was participating. But anyway, thank you.
Yeah. Persistent is a key word. Yes.
Persistent is the key word. Okay, we are now going to move on to Doug. And Doug, you're on. Your time. Come and tell us what your history and involvement with the IEEE 1588 Precision Time Protocol was. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I should warn you, I'm at a hotel in San Diego. I'm attending the workshop on synchronization and timing systems here. And outside my window, I hear kids playing in the pool and jet aircraft flying by. So if you get some noise, I apologize. So John mentioned that I came to this meeting. It was like a local chapter of the IEEE where he was presenting this new protocol. And at the time, I was working for a company that provided timing solutions for many different industries. And what we saw is all these industries were gradually moving from the days where they had some kind of industry-specific communication technology and industry-specific separate timing network, and they were all moving to Ethernet and IP and standard datacom hardware, because that was cheaper and you could hire people who already knew about it. So it had a lot of advantages, but now we had to get time through those networks, and they weren't designed for that at all. So it was a challenge, and many of us had been involved in NTP, and we were trying to figure out how to make NTP more precise. And my company, and I wasn't with Meinberg yet, but Meinberg was already working on it as well. And then I went to this thing, and this guy named John Eidson presented this IEEE standard that had just been hatched. And I said, well, that's the IEEE. That's the way it's got to go. And so we immediately changed our plans, and as did all the other timing companies. And so I became involved in it. And then at some point, I wanted to become involved in the ISPCS as well. I was very eager to, and so I went to Kang and said, Kang, I want to be part of the ISPCS. Give me the worst job you have. And without even hesitating, he said Plugfest, which is actually quite a bit of work, but it's very rewarding. And that's where I see how this stuff really works or doesn't work. So that's how I became involved, and I'm with Weinberg now, which is really totally focused on providing time for all kinds of industries. And so I've stayed active in ISPCS, but also in IEEE 1588. At one point, I think John was trying to retire, and they kept dragging him back in. Kang twisted his arm and made him chair another go around, and so I offered to be a co-chair on the last edition, and that's how I got into organizing that group. So we've kind of changed the way we're working now. It's gotten to be pretty big, and one of the IEEE process can be very frustrating, but one of the great things about the IEEE is they can make standards that are not directed just at one industry. They are pan-industry, all industries can use it, and that's certainly the case with IEEE 1588, where many, many different industries use it. And so, but that means there's lots of voices who have coming from a different perspective, different traditions, and it makes it hard. So what we've gone to now is, instead of having a big addition like we did last time that took many years, we're rolling out amendments. When we have on a focused topic, we have an amendment come out. We had a couple come out a year, the last few years, and occasionally we'll roll those up into a new edition, but it's more of a continuous upgrade of the standard rather than a big lump change. I also should point out, you had a picture you showed earlier, Paul, about where there was of John Eidson. I think it was slide 7, maybe. There it is. To John's left is Karen O'Donoghue, who for many years has been chair of the NTP working group. You might think NTP is a kind of a rival standard, but actually there's a lot of overlap. I work on NTP as well, and Karen works on PTP as chair of the security subcommittee for a number of years. So it's all part of the timing community. There's a lot of companies where they have like maybe 1 or 2 timing gurus, and they're lonely. And then they come to these events like the ISPCS and realize, well, there's a whole bunch of us. We're a community. And so there's a real bonding. Even people who work for competing companies develop strong friendships at these meetings.
Excellent. Thank you, Doug. Do you have any more before we move into the next part of the session?
I wanted to leave more time for questions. So
all right, let's do that. Good. And
I would like to recognize, Meinberg's, Doug's boss, Heiko Gersten. He really support the 1588 standard, allow Doug to work with us wholeheartedly. I like to recognize that. Thank you.
Excellent.
Yeah, and I went to work for Weinberg because I felt like they were the first ones to go all in on network timing more than any other company. And I went there, and they have been very committed. And Heiko Gersten, who runs that company now, is very, very committed to PTP and to events that revolve around that and sponsoring it.
Yeah, I appreciate the continuous support year after years. Yes.
They also did a whole lot in promoting the timing community.
Mm-hmm.
They really did.
Yes.
Excellent. All right. Well, let's move on. I also want to thank Kevin Stanton, who is on the call today. He provided all of those wonderful photographs that we're all seeing right now. That brings a really nice historic and human view of the situation. I know that Judith Olson is on here too and appreciates that very much. So thank you very much, gentlemen, so far for those introductions. I'd like to move into this 3-part question and answer session, which I would like to be free-flowing amongst all of you. So please feel free to compliment each other's comments. but I'd like to keep the questions just, for the ones that we're putting out at the moment. And then towards the end, we will have time for questions from the audience. So we are now talking about the past. I'd like to ask the speakers, please, if you would. I mean, it's very easy to gloss past, some of the concepts and terminology that we're using. So first of all, tell us about the concepts and what are boundary clocks, what are transparent clocks, what are grandmaster clocks, and what are ordinary clocks? Who would like to take that?
Doug, why don't you start on that one? I can't remember how they all evolved, but originally there was basically we had just ordinary clocks deciding who would be the grandmaster. That was the basis of 2002. We had this scheme for deciding which was the best clock, and then everybody else would take their time from that. Turned out a lot of companies wanted to make clocks that were specifically designed to be a good grandmaster. So I think that may be how they came in. The transparent clocks and the boundary clocks sort of evolved out of the need. I think when we brought in more of the companies like Juniper and Broadcom, who made that sort of gear for telecom for the internet anyway. That's what I recall about how they all came about.
Yeah, I might add that, we had NTP, but it wasn't precise enough. And the biggest source of error is queuing noise in switches.
Yeah.
Excuse me. And so version 1 of the standard included the concept of a boundary clock so that you could have a switch that could help with timing. And of course, a boundary clock it receives time from another device, and it synchronizes itself and then redistributes it out the other ports. But before the version 2 of the standard came out, a company called On Time Networks had created a hack where they just had a switch that just adjusted the timestamps and make it look like it didn't spend any time in it. And John decided at that point, it's like, well, if people are going to do that, we better take control of it and define that so there's some consistent behavior. So the 2008 edition of 1588 included a definition of transparent clocks. It was another way for switches to help, which is they don't synchronize themselves to the time and redistribute it. Rather, they just make corrections.
Doug, you might want to mention that we trying to introduce the concept, the better grandmaster clock, something in that beyond standard block. Maybe you want to mention that. So
yes, yes. So that was a new amendment that came out. So part of PTP from the beginning was there was an automated way for PTP devices to organize themselves into a clock hierarchy based on the qualities of the clocks that they could announce to the rest of the network. But some of the techniques for deciding how time flows were pretty simple. It was how many switches did you go through with something called steps removed, and it didn't reflect that some switches might be much more precise than others in terms of limiting the time error that they introduce. And so the new amendment adds options for much more sophisticated analysis to decide what's the best path for time to flow from the grandmaster clock to the rest of the network. And that's an example of one of the amendments that we've been working on it's on the 2019 edition. It's actually 2019 because the IEEE gives it a name based on the year it was approved, not when it finally gets published, because there's still a process after they approve it where you work with the technical writers at the IEEE Standards Association to get it all in the right format and find the last little spelling errors or whatever that might need to be fixed.
There's some interesting stories around that problem.
Yeah.
So, well, we'll get into those stories. That would be great, John. So now, just to give us a flavor here for people who are not familiar with PTP, regarding your original idea to transform, time synchronization over Ethernet, what was this motivated by a specific need or a crisis or an opportunity?
Well, back when I started the work in Hewlett Packard, this was the version of Ethernet with the coaxial cables. You remember all that stuff? And that's what we were working on. So that's why we developed it on that. And it resulted in some really interesting effects when we were testing it, because we occasionally brought the network down, and that would bring the IT guys around. So that's why we started there. But we also recognized fairly early on that there were a lot of other communication media that people were using. I mean, Rockwell had their own. It was a CAN-based architecture, which they had a huge installed base, and they put PTP on that. And so I think that was key, the ability to, or the intent to make this protocol applicable to whatever communication you were using. And surely as time has evolved, it has gone to more than just standard Ethernet. It's on a number of other communication media as well.
Excellent. So maybe this is a Doug question. So Doug, what were the unmet needs that motivated the various revisions of the standard?
One is flexibility. As different industries said, yes, we want to base our timing standards on PTP, but we have these traditions in our industry that call for some slightly different variants of PTP, and so we had to have options that made it more flexible. And we had so many options at one point that during the development of the 2008 edition, we decided we had to have profiles. So a profile would be, for a specific industry or use case or something, someone would say, use only these options, don't use these others, so that at least within this profile, things will still interoperate. So that was one need. The other was for higher accuracy, and that's where Maciej Lipinski from CERN, and he was working on his PhD thesis at the time, which turned into the White Rabbit open source implementation of PTP, that was more precise, so he could get sub-nanosecond agreement among nodes doing measurements at CERN, and has been used for a lot of other scientific applications and other sort of niche, very high precision time transfer applications. So that accuracy was the second one after flexibility. And then as people started to depend on this, we wanted to make it more secure and robust. And so security became an issue. And Karen O'Donoghue was important. She came in from the IETF, and the IETF, more than the IEEE, had tremendous amount of cybersecurity expertise that she could tap into, and so she headed that up. And I should point out that PTP is maybe the most vulnerable protocol I've ever encountered. The flexibility makes it vulnerable. It's the ability to form automatically into a timing hierarchy just by exchanging messages. A side effect of that is that a hacker could come in and claim to have the best clock credentials and take over the network. And so it makes it particularly vulnerable, and it's all done on multicast. And so anyone who can join the multicast address can participate. So we started adding security, and that's an ongoing process. We just have an amendment that got approved and is not out yet, but it will be very within weeks, so with some more security work. So I think that's an important area as well.
So what are the most effective strategies for PTP vulnerability mitigation?
I think the important thing is, so we defined in the 2019 edition an authentication TLV so that messages could be authenticated. They proved that they weren't tampered with. But if you combine that with a key management protocol of some kind, that management protocol can basically check the authorization of nodes to make sure that they can receive a key. And that way they can't participate in the PTP messaging unless they are given a key. So I think the biggest vulnerability for PTP is message injection rather than man-in-the-middle attacks, because man-in-the-middle attacks means you have to take over a switch, and that's hard. But injection attacks means you only need to get access to the network. You take over a laptop or something that happens to be connected to the network, you can become the grandmaster. And so making sure that anyone who's participating is actually authorized to do so is probably the most important security aspect.
Excellent. All right. Well, it's just coming to 11:25 right now. I'd like to shift into where we're at today and being able to evolve our understanding. So the fire is lighter, and all sorts of interesting things are happening. And so, besides security, I mean, what are the other anomalies that have to be taken care of in PTP? And this might include, for example, being under an APS, an Advanced Persistent Threat, APT threat. How do you manage those kinds of attacks? And I heard you say that multicast, it's all on multicast, you do authentication and you add key management. But as we've discovered almost every week now, we have major infrastructures being taken down by these kinds of attacks that are all infrastructures are under on a daily basis.
Yes, and so that's important. I think as people move to zero trust networks by necessity, where just because you're behind the firewall, you don't feel safe, you assume that everything's insecure, then I think people will start using secure versions of PTP. I know some industries in particular are pursuing this from a standards point of view. Power is one of them. Because they have a tradition already of secure protocols as part of the IEC-defined SCADA system. I know people in broadcast television studios and live television events are very interested in security. I take part in the telecommunications timing group at the ITU, and we're discussing security. One of the challenges with security for time in particular, it's not data, it's different from data, it's really more of a signal. And so the information isn't secret, but it's even just delaying it. So there's a unique attack that only affects timing, where if a switch were just to hold up messages, it doesn't have to alter them in any way. So it couldn't be detected by cryptographic methods. Just hold up the messages so they're slower in one direction than the other, then that results in a timing error at the end nodes. And then there's the best master clock algorithm that I mentioned before is vulnerable. And so I think various security mechanisms are going to have to be added to, as people become more and more reliant on PTP as part of critical infrastructure like telecommunications and power grids and finance and television and all these things, defense.
So how does PTP, I'm going to change subjects right now because I know that there's a deep dive and lots of exciting things going on in the evolution of the standard, so that to address these issues, we'll get to that at the end in the section about the future. But just during about the present here, how does PTP relate to PTM, the precision time measurement that Intel has worked on?
Well, PTP is very good at delivering precise time to the network port. But you know, time is needed at the software application layer. They're making calls to time and they need to know precisely what time it is at that layer. And that's a hard problem. What Kevin Stanton called the last inch problem, where you've got to get the, you want to know what time it is, or you want to determine a time interval or something, and you need to be able to get that to the application layer. And so the PCM is, a combination of hardware and software that you can put into standard PC and server technology that will allow more precise transfer of time from the network port to the system clock.
Excellent. And so how does PTP and PTM relate to White Rabbit, the CERN initiative on precision time?
Yeah, so as good as PTP is, there are still sources of error, which we refer to as asymmetry. So NTP and PTP both make one assumption, and that is that the delay in the forward direction is the same as the delay in the reverse direction. And to the extent that that's not true, half of that difference ends up in clock error, because the end devices can't tell the difference between an asymmetry and a correction to their clock coming from the grandmaster. So what White Rabbit does is it says, well, if we want to get down to below a nanosecond, then we need to calibrate out all those asymmetries. So they calibrate the cables, they calibrate the Ethernet circuitry, the PHY chips as well, which have some asymmetry in them. And they also use frequency lock of the whole Ethernet circuit, so that when they do the calibration, it stays in place. They lock all the clocks in an Ethernet link, so that calibration continues to hold. And this was sort of innovations that were introduced by CERN through Maciej Lipinski's group, and he is now in charge of new features. We have a new features subcommittee, and we put him in charge because he was doing some of the new exciting stuff.
Fascinating. That leads me on to the question, why do experimental physicists say, never measure anything but frequency?
I'm not a physicist, and I think there's, when you consider things like quantum effects and relativity, then time becomes a much more complex quantity to consider than we do in the current model that we use for PTP, which is more classical. And what we really need to get to that next level is we need some of those physicists, all those people working on quantum internet and quantum computing things. We need some of them to join the working group and help us not only find the solutions, but tell us exactly how did we pose the problem. What does it mean to be synchronized when you have particles that are entangled but separated, when you have relativistic effects going on? It's quite challenging.
Excellent. All right, good. Well, anything else going on in the present day that that is interesting to us in terms of problems that we need to address, or industries that we need to? For example, what was the most interesting application of PTP that you've ever come across?
Well, we probably all have those. To me, CERN was the most interesting from the accuracy and the implication. But there's a couple of others. If you'll indulge me for a minute, there was the music people were using 1588 for a while, and that sort of branched over into the people that do public address systems in airports and stadia and all of that. And I know when the UC Berkeley Stadium was upgraded, they upgraded the public address system. And what they did was use PTP they time synchronized all of the speakers around the stadium so that they could essentially phase everything. So that no matter where you were sitting, things were coming in phase. You didn't hear the first one, the closest one first, and then something else coming later that screwed it up. With the net result, if they really wanted to, they could blast noise right into the opponent's huddle. So it's technology like that that's reduced echoes in public spaces. To me, that was a fairly fascinating one.
It sounds like there could also be some audiophile applications there as well.
I would suspect.
Yeah, and actually related to that, we had several presentations this week on live television events, especially sporting events, where you had to build a network and then move it the next week for some other event. And so there was a company that had synchronized the Super Bowl, and another gentleman who's been involved in several Olympics. And all the cameras and all the microphones are synchronized, and the processing equipment to combine those again are synchronized using PTP as well as the standard old audio video timing signals.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing interested me is when I heard about one time at the ISPCS conference, a gentleman gave a talk about how the financial industry is interested in 1588. So actually, I learned a little bit more about that. Well, maybe because when I was younger, I used to be a currency trader because it's currency go up and down, quite exciting. So I used to trade that, and so when they mentioned that the financial industry interested in PTP, that's great. So I learned a bit more, and actually I gave a keynote speech at the Indent conference in Cambridge, England, on this particular subject when I introduced 1588 to the conference. And so I mean it's nice and it's reasonable because when you trade a stock, right, it go up and down. If you can resolve the time better, you can get maybe pennies different, but when you multiply by millions of shares, it's a lot of money. So up and down, if you can catch a high and sell the low. So it's interesting to me when the financial industry are interested in our standards.
Yeah, and those people are making decisions in about 100 nanoseconds now.
Yeah.
So they don't even use servers anymore. It's all done on very large FPGAs, so they can respond that quickly. And they want to make measurements, and they use PTP, and they've gone, a lot of them, to White Rabbit PTP, so that they can make sufficiently accurate measurements. But even for more mundane trading, there are still tighter and tighter over time regulatory requirements to have accurate timestamps that you can convince a government auditor that they were legit timestamps. And so they've moved, a lot of them have moved to PTP to deal with the MiFID II requirements, which are only 100 microseconds precision. Nothing like what the high frequency traders use, but it's a legal requirement, and you have to show that all your trades were within that limit.
Mm-hmm. Good. Yes. Hey, now Ahmed, you have to build your time card to that accuracy now.
Yeah, for sure. No, we are actually incorporating a DPLL into the time card to help with what is needed for what Mache is after with all the White Rabbit things.
And thanks for chiming in, Ahmad. So Ahmad Baigawi at Meta is kind of one of the leaders in the data center timing. That's a huge growth area. It's a lot of activity now. It used to be for distributed databases, which is important, but now it's for distributed anything, any kind of computing, AI training, you name it. Ahmad could probably give you more detail on that. That's a big growth area now for PTP.
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Doug, like for bringing it up. Yeah, it is heartwarming, I will say. Like when I see, uh, I mean, I got introduced to this whole thing, PTP and everything, like, but without Michel Alouette, which John knows very well. He introduced me to most of these things. And I mean, I never thought like until I heard it now from you guys, like you had to go also through all this like resistance and difficulty and like like adoption, all of these things that I'm facing, like in my endeavor, like on getting precise time for data centers and so on. And that basically when I got introduced to PTBs was kind of a de facto. Most of the things were there. I mean, like transparent clock, there were already options, let's say, like in the ASIC already implemented. And again, this I think just reminds me to like building on the like a shoulder of giants, basically. And again, thank you for you guys, like all this work you guys have done. And like we honor it and we'll try to build on top of it, basically. But specifically to what you were asking to basically mention, like where is this going? Initially it was like the precise time was related to creating consensus, like data consensus, basically in distributed databases. But then over time, we started looking at like where precise time can really make a difference, let's say in datacom, that it will be useful where you have shared commodity and you can schedule, like tight scheduling in a shared commodity to use the resources effective. And we saw like, let's say two shared commodities that you have in, let's say, datacom. I mean, everywhere pretty much is network and power. And so now when you have stems, let's say PUs, with different like power profile over doing, let's say, a continuous job, repetitive job, you will have, let's say, peaks and you have average. So when you provision, let's say, the number of GPUs or let's say whatever you have in the system to do the processing, you look for the peak and you try to provision based on the peak. And then that gives you the, like, let's say how much power budget you have, you divide that by the peak power that you have, and that gives you the maximum machines you can utilize. However, if you have, let's say, scaling as your main goal, and you're like at a position that you want to just add more and more as much as possible to a given power budget, you can look at like what has done, let's say in telecom, in like how they use the RF channels and all of these things, and you can perhaps make some arrangement, let's say, between different pipelines in a way that a peak of one pipeline falls on a trough of another pipeline. And by that, you will reduce, or I mean, you create destructive interference. And by doing that, you will have an overall minimized peak to average. And that means you can include more machines or like more units, basically, for the same given profile, because you will have less of those peak events. And then also it reduces, let's say, your VAR, like you will have less to worry about your cosine phi factor correction. And as if this whole thing is not enough, let's say the power thing, you can do also everything for the network where you don't have, let's say, the need for deep buffers when you want to, let's say, do exchange between all nodes of certain data, and you, quote unquote, you transmit responsibly, where you have everything deterministic, when you can put certain things in line, and then when every data basically wants to go from somewhere, like all the hops all are prepared for it. So you reduce, let's say, buffer usage and let's say congestion and all of these things. But most of these things, again, are right now theoretic, or like, several, prototypes. We don't have them in wide use. And this is, again, okay, up for the future. So handing it back to you guys.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ahmed. And on that note, we are now deep into the question about what happens in the future. So I'm going to throw one question out to the gentlemen who are our guests today, and help us discuss around that for the last few minutes before I hand over to the audience asking for their questions. So the question is, what will the next version of PTP look like?
Well, it'll look it'll be incremental. It won't be a big new thing that where there's a whole bunch of new, because now we're releasing amendments one at a time, and so those amendments, people are using them even before we roll them up into another revision. So that's going on. But I think key things that have to be addressed is we've talked about White Rabbit, and White Rabbit is great, but it requires manual configuration, manual calibration of ports, and that just doesn't scale to the size of a telecommunications network, for example. So we need some kind of absolute calibration method for those kind of accuracies. That's one thing. We talked about security. People are very interested in monitoring timing networks, and they want the monitoring to be a standard, because right now every equipment manufacturer has their own monitoring scheme, and that's just not, it's hard to work with for the network operator. So they want standard monitoring and management that all devices that have PTP use. And we are about to release a MIB and YANG, official MIB and YANG for PTP, and that's a step in that direction, but we need more things as well. So I think that's an aspect.
Excellent. So are there any applications that are needed for like storage to guarantee that there's silent data corruption, for example, doesn't creep in? Is there other applications of PTP that can help us with the storage world?
That might be one for Ahmad. Ahmad, what do you know about the storage aspect of data centers?
Well, I mean the database thing that we described perhaps is a bit geared toward that, but let's say something directly to address, like let's say to having like the storage controller, let's say having a notion of time. I mean, I didn't put that much thought about it, but perhaps you will have the same thing, like you will have the cap theory implemented all the way to the hardware, and then it really the value doesn't come into, I mean, just thinking loud, like the value is not going to come just out of if you store one unit, like you have some precision time, like when you store something in a storage. I mean, storage is always like it's a memory, right? You're putting things off for taking it later. But when you have a horizontal expansion, then yes, you will need some, let's say, consistency, and that is where perhaps this comes in. But everything so far we thought of is in the application layer, where you distribute things between the storages, and storages are just a subsystem of those units that you're creating coordination with.
Thank you.
I don't see why not. I mean, it's very interesting. It's thought-provoking. Thanks.
The reason I say that is because I'm on the organizing committee for this year's the conference that used to be the Flash Memory Summit is now called the Future Memory and Storage Conference. So that's I'm out on the lookout for interesting topics that we can include in the agenda for that conference. That's in August. So let's use our last 10 or 15 minutes of time here for audience questions. So if you've got a question, please put it in the chat, or if things look open, just open your microphone and raise your hand, or let's see where we go from here. So audience questions to our esteemed guests here, Doug and John and Matt, and where am I now? Let's
Kang.
so Dan, I see you've opened up. Kang,
hello.
Kang, you sometimes sitting so still, I can't see you move. Now, it's interesting because I'm looking for you in a certain, I have this spatial awareness and I'm looking for you in a certain place on the screen, but you keep moving around because Zoom is playing games with me. I can see
Sorry.
two questions. I can see two questions coming up, one from Judith Olson and then Silvana Rodriguez. So let's take them in that order. Judith, go ahead.
You guys brought up the concept of zero trust authentication type networks. I keep seeing, that buzzword in tandem with timing. There's articles from, timing companies about its usage, but I can't find anything about how it's actually used or where that security comes from for using timing. Can any of you talk a little bit more about that?
I could say something. First of all, we're not there yet. We need more development to make timing to fit into a zero trust network concept. The other thing I can say is I've talked to a lot of network operators, and they all say, "Oh yeah, zero trust. We're all about that." And then I ask them a bunch of questions about what they do, and it's not zero trust at all. It's like, "Oh, we only do that if it's over a lease line." It's like, well, that's not zero trust. It's like, so it's something everyone's aware of, but people aren't quite doing it yet. They just know they should be.
That's interesting. Thanks. I appreciate that. Makes me feel better because that's kind of the vibe I've gotten to when talking to people in that space.
Okay, thank you, Judith. Did you get your question answered?
Yeah, I think that's probably about as concrete as most people are able to get right now.
Next, I have Silvana, followed by Dan, and then Hank, and then Ramki. So, Silvana, you're next. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. It's not a question, just a comment. We're talking about earlier today the father of Ethernet. I consider John Eidson the father of 1588, and I have to say this is so great to see you, John. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent. Dan, you're next. Go ahead.
Yeah, so in a similar comment, back when I was in Cisco 2005, 2006, I remember John came and talked to us about 1588 and what we were doing with our Ethernet switch to make it 1588 aware. And it's just, it was very inspiring to see all the work that he did then and, what has come of the last, almost 20 years in this area. It's very exciting, I'm very thankful for, that one meeting that we had, sparked, the work, a lot of work at Cisco and, a lot of work in my career has been based off of 1588 since then. So like Silvana said, I too feel he's the father of 1588 and want to thank him for everything that he's done.
Welcome, Dan.
Excellent. Okay, Hank, and then Ramki, and then Hisham. Hank, go ahead.
A couple questions. Maybe the first one is, what about Byzantine errors in the BMCA?
That's an excellent question. I did put in the draft enterprise profile that's still working its way through the ITF. The idea that I recommended that you run multiple PTP domains in parallel, and then you have some logic outside of PTP that combines the time that you get from these different domains. And there's further encouragement to say, well, the grandmasters of the different domains should be as separate as possible in the network topology, so you have minimum path overlap and the best chance of catching a clock that's failing and doesn't realize it, or some kind of a hacking issue by using a voting scheme.
Well, yeah, there's other schemes than voting. There's a couple companies that are doing that sort of stuff, kind of a best clock at client rather than best master clock. But I won't get into a sales pitch right now. The other one is about SPTP, or simple PTP. Ahmad, is that being picked up by a lot of different people, or where's that going?
I mean, we built it for our need and we're using it for our need. And if the others like to use it or not, well, they're more than welcome. We put it all free and open source out there. So
I should point out that we submitted a project authorization request to the IEEE to create what we called client server PTP, which is it's based on Ahmad's work as well as a couple other companies coming up with similar ideas of sort of stateless servers and more simple messaging.
Okay. Doug, going back to that DMCA thing, you're talking about multiple PTP domains. Is there somebody who has a patent on that?
No, I haven't been able to get anyone to do it. I put it out there. I thought it was needed. But no implementations that I know of. There are some non-standard sort of PTP-like things that do that. There's a trading firm that created their own PTP implementation, and they didn't implement the BMCA. They just have every grandmaster send time and let the end node sort it out. So they basically enable some kind of a voting scheme.
That's kind of like enterprise profile.
Yes. And it's NTP-like. And I've had a lot of especially people in finance come to me and say, why didn't you make it more like NTP and have the ability to detect a false ticker? And it's like, well, that's at the time it made more sense to have an automatic hierarchy form, and that has value too in some applications. So, but with I think using multiple domains, you can do both.
By the way, what Doug referred to the standard is P1588.1. So in case you guys are interested.
Excellent.
Doug,
Okay.
as a quick point on the multiple domain thing, 802.1 ASDM has an official standard that's in final balloting now that uses multiple domains as well. So there's even standardization out there that uses multiple domains.
Excellent. So on my list as we close, I've got Silvana, then Ramki, and then Hisham. Silvana, go ahead.
Sorry, I forgot to lower my hand. I'm sorry.
All right, good. So Ramki, you're next. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. A couple of thoughts here. One is a comment. You guys talked about the storage area network. I dealt with them in Equinix. So we use bare metal servers, storage, databases. It's already being used. PTP or some kind of synchronization is used. But the thing is, we don't need sub-microsecond. Okay, we're plenty happy with tens of microsecond synchronization accuracy right now in the world of storage area network. If you guys are looking for use case, that's kind of where it is. It could demand a more accurate time stamping scenario in future. That's my comment. Now, regarding my question to the panel here, what is TSN going to do to PTP? Can they coexist, or the time-sensitive networking is going to change the PTP landscape?
Well, TSN is still officially a profile of PTP, and we actually made a lot of changes to PTP in the last edition to make sure that was true. So we had to create some options and things for the way they do things, because we wanted the TSN group within 802.1 to sort of be cooperating with PTP, and that's come up again recently, where they have some unique needs for the automotive industry and they need some changes, and we've agreed to pursue those.
Okay.
Excellent.
So they're going to coexist, in my opinion. They're not. One is not going to eliminate the other. They're going to coexist and kind of move things forward.
Yeah.
Okay.
Excellent.
Also, thanks, Ramki, for bringing up. There are a lot of applications that need something like on the order of 10 microseconds. It's not all 1 microsecond or 100 nanoseconds. There's a huge range of different requirements.
I can't get into specifics, but I can tell you, having onboarded over 300 customers in a co-location data center ecosystem, I can tell you they're plenty happy with 50 to 100 microsecond. 80% of the world needs that kind of accuracy. Only a small percentage, that percentage is growing. They need sub-microsecond accuracy. So the money is still in the 80% market from a from a business standpoint. Just wanted to kind
Yeah.
of lay it out.
All right. Thank you very much, Ramki. Very interesting question. Excellent questions. And Hisham, you're next. Go ahead. Hisham, you are.
Yeah. So I am, yes, thanks, Paul. My question is really simple. I would like to know from all these experts, what are the open, challenging, or outstanding problems, time synchronization that haven't been solved yet?
I think one that came up earlier was we really don't have a true zero trust network solution for PTP. We're getting close with that. I think there's when you have large networks that don't have on-pass support, standard PTP tends to devolve down to NTP levels of accuracy, but that's not necessarily the case. People have done proprietary things that work in those situations, and that could be added to PTP. I think more monitoring, standardized monitoring is coming. We had a plea for that at the conference I'm at now, where someone was saying, please, we need standard-based monitoring so that and management so that everyone can use one tool and have it work with everyone, all the different companies' equipment. I think that's something.
Doug, do you mind if I chime in with one that you
Not at all.
You hit on earlier, and that is that for the higher speed, thinking of Ethernet specifically, for the higher speed Ethernet variants that are coming out, like 800 gig and 1.6 terabit and stuff, those PHYs tend to have a lot of time error just in the PHY implementation themselves with lane marking and FEC and things like that. I think for the applications that want really accurate time, they're going to feel the hurt of that, and there'll need to be some efforts to try to like work with the PHY vendors. Some may have noticed that MOPA recently came out with some things to try to work toward mitigating that, and I would guess that that's going to be a topic coming up in the future, like you hinted earlier when you mentioned calibration and things like that.
Yeah, thanks, Rodney. And Rodney, by the way, is the vice chair of PTP, and Silvana, who spoke earlier, is also an officer, and they are both also involved in other standards group on timing, so they're very important to the world of PTP. Yeah, Rodney's correct. The really high speed Ethernets, they have many lanes, and the way the specs are, the lanes can be kind of askew from each other, and so then we want to timestamp right when messages leave.
Can I add something about that, Doug?
Yes.
Go ahead, Silva.
There is some work done on 802.3. It's called 802.3CX, exactly for that. So it's a new amendment to 802.3 that deals with the lanes and FEC and things like that to allow very precise timestamps.
Silvana, I totally agree that 802.3CX was a big step forward, but it's not even close to solving the problem. I don't want to get into all the details of it, but yeah, there's more work to be done. Let's put it that way with 802.3.
I see.
Excellent. All right, Jack,
I'd like to make a comment.
How about femto second accuracy?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear all of that.
Kang was making a comment.
But how about getting or achieving femtosecond accuracy?
So Hisham, let's take that second next. There was a comment from Kang related to the last question. So Kang, why don't you make your comment first? Go ahead, Kang.
Oh, okay. Yeah, in regard to the gentleman's question on zero trust, yeah, we are currently addressing that zero trust issue and smart sensor for IoT, and smart sensor use synchronization protocol also. So I'm quite sure we migrate down to I will talk to Doug about more. later.
One thing I want to add, John Eidson needs to leave exactly at 12. Just want to.
No, don't worry about it.
Okay.
We resolve that question, Ahmed. All right. Good. All right. So Hisham, thank you for waiting. Why don't you go next, and then Wojciech, you be next. Hisham.
Yeah. So how about achieving femtosecond accuracy?
Femtosecond.
That's I think going below picoseconds starts to get into all these modern physics concepts that it's like I'm not sure how to do that.
We can do femto.
Not sure how to do it with or off-the-shelf hardware.
That's a very good point. I mean, there are research labs that are using femto, but they tend to be in very, watching molecular reactions play out, things that are going crazy fast. And at least I haven't heard of anybody in industry who's actually asking for femtoseconds that really wants it.
So I guess
I think the quantum internet people are asking for that, but they also think they can help. So that's why we need them to show up at 1588.
Yeah.
Great answer.
The question
and generally, I think a lot of the quantum internet folks, at least what I've heard, is like low tens of picoseconds are enough for their timing needs for the coincidence measurements.
When do we stop sharpening the guillotine?
Yeah, there was a presentation at the last PTTI meeting, precise time and time interval, and someone was presenting a graph, and then the x-axis was in attoseconds. So there are people really thinking of very, very small time intervals.
All right, let's go back. So Hisham, I hope you got your question answered. On my list, I have Wojciech and Silvana again. Wojciech, go ahead.
Hello, and well, firstly, always enjoy listening to John speak and Kang and Doug. So really appreciated this. And just to briefly echo Rodney's comments, and having worked with low latency transports and sort of deterministic like networking for a while, yeah, everything is fine until you have a single, as long as you have a single lane, then things start getting more jittery, so to speak. But the question I had was going slightly into the future and talking about sort of ubiquitous timing. Are there any initiatives looking at sort of globally available precision timing? So across ISP infrastructures, sort of, as just like we were able to use NTP, we still are able to use NTP over the internet. Is there any work that you're aware of being done on sort of enabling global time sync, public time sources going into nanosecond accuracy, and any work around enabling that on the infrastructure, so internet exchanges and so on?
Well, right now the global source of time come from satellites, GPS, Galileo, things like Satellus, that's in the Iridium satellites. In terms of terrestrial-based systems, lots of discussion and a lot of technical work on how to get time through networks more accurately. I think a very interesting example would be what happened with Turk Telecom, where parts of the country were jammed for weeks or months at a time. So GPS wasn't available or anything like GPS. And they had to get time across their country. So like their whole network. And so they used a proprietary solution, but it's one that's now being worked on from a standards point of view in the ITUT Q13 timing group, and Silvana, who was on earlier, is the vice chair of that group, as well as Stefano Ruffini, who's the chair, and both of them are also very involved in 1588. So we have these great crossovers that are helpful.
Fantastic.
Okay.
So Wojciech, did we get your question answered?
Mostly yes. What I was really partially referring to is sort of more easily accessible timing. So imagine an internet user with a device that isn't necessarily a specialized timing device, and their only internet access is, let's say, via a internet wire towards their ISP. I'm basically looking at the equivalent of the availability or the ease of access to NTP today that you have everywhere.
Well, I
And sort
could
of extending that.
Yeah, I could mention that some work that's going on in the 3GPP is because the telecom network already has time it has to in order to work. That they're coming up with some standards for supplying that to someone who would have a 5G receiver that could pull time off that and then redistribute it locally. So that would be it would be sort of a terrestrial-based wireless way of distributing time if that really took off.
Okay, great, thanks.
Excellent. Now, Hasham, you've got your hand still up. Did we get your question answered? I'm going to assume that we did. Okay. So we're going to kind of slowly close down the session. I'm happy to stay as long as anyone else wants to be on here. And our three guests, John Eidson and Douglas Arnold and Kang Lee. So I guess we're moving into the question about the future and how it is that we can really find new use cases. And then, of course, there's another dimension of this, which is the scientific questions of for example, I'm going to ask. Here's the question I'm going to ask. So, John and Doug and Kang, what do you know but you can't prove? So we can give you an open question here for you not to worry about speculating.
Say again.
What do you know but you can't prove?
I'm not quite sure I understand.
Well, let me try a different question then.
Actually, I can give you one answer to that. It's when I talk to the NTP people, they make these error bounds on network timing that is based on the worst possible case of network timing, due to asymmetry. And with P2P networks, I know they're more accurate than that, but it's really hard to prove without actually measuring it, and then you have to have time already to measure it. So it's like that's one of the challenging things about time. So in order to prove you're getting good time, you already have to have it.
Excellent. Maybe the final question is, what do you think time is continuous or discrete?
I think I'll come down on discrete.
Doug?
I think I come down on the appropriate way to think of it depends on the problem you're working on.
Yeah, to me, it's depend on your application.
Maybe that's an engineering response. Yeah, no,
I second the discrete. So.
All right. Well, I'm happy to hang around. Does anyone else have any more questions? I don't see any hands up except for Hisham, and I think we answered his question. So I'd like to thank our guest today. This was an absolutely wonderful and absolutely heartwarming and intellectually stimulating conversation. I am so delighted to have been honored to have this fireside chat today. I hope that Ahmed will invite us back in the future to work on other fireside chats of interesting things. But this is one that was extremely special. We waited for the 100th presentation today of the Time Appliance Project videos. So Ahmed, would you like to close the conference with your final conference?
Thank you very much, Paul, for this amazing moderating and all the thought-provoking questions. And again, thank you to the guests, and we'll see everyone in 2 weeks for call number 101. So
this is great. I usually talk a lot, but I just was being a fanboy. I appreciate everyone's time.
You're welcome.
Well,
so go 3 digits.
if anyone have any challenging standard they want to develop and to help, industry and humanity. I'm not afraid of the challenge. I will sponsor it. Let's discuss it.
We've got some work for you then. Let's talk.
So from my point of view, it's just nice to see some old friends and hear where things are going.
Thanks for starting all this, John.
Yes.
Thank you all.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Yep.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye, everybody. Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much.